Thank you for joining the Free Time Mastermind podcast. I'm your host, Robert Gaines. Today's guest is author and educator, Evan Whitehead. His writing has been featured in a number of compilation works on education. Today, we'll discuss his own journey, struggles in school himself, and later his transition into education. Here's Evan. Thank you for coming on, Evan. Where are you calling in from this evening?
So I'm calling in from right outside the city of Chicago in the Chicago suburbs in Illinois.
Well, I appreciate you coming on. You're the second educator that I've interviewed so far. And of course, I served in the military, and people, will sometimes thank veterans for their service. But I want to thank you as an educator because honestly, I think that the mission of educators are just equally as important as the military. It's a wonderful career field, but also like the military, it's a thankless job. You're touching a lot of lives, and I don't think educators are told that enough. So thank you so much for reaching the hearts and minds of the people out there and helping build the character of the next generation.
Well, thank you very much, Robert. I appreciate that. I appreciate the kudos and thanking us. And we do a lot of hard work. But also, I want to thank you for your service as well, because we would not be able to have the great country that we live in right now with all the opportunities that we have. And sometimes it's hard to see the forest amongst the trees. But the reality is, like, we live in the greatest country in the world. I don't care what anybody says. I will stand on that. We have the ability to have our own opinions, and be able to have opportunities, if presented to us, to make the type of life that we want. And it's all because of folks like you, folks that, like my grandmother and my uncles, and my cousins that served in the military, that allow us to do that on a daily basis, even to the point of those that may not realize what they have here. They have the ability to not realize and still may disagree with things because of what you all do. So thank you for your service.
Thank you very much. And as far as education, was that a calling for you early in life, or did you slowly gravitate towards it?
I was kind of figuring out what I need to do in life. I didn't have my bachelor's degree. I had courses and credits, but I didn't finish, and I was about 4 years removed from high school at the time. And I was basically just kind of blowing in the wind. And my mom was like, you got to figure it out. And so one of the options was either to follow in the footsteps of my grandfather and my cousins and my uncle and you, and go that route. Or, she said, you've always been good with kids. Because in high school, all the students with disabilities and special needs went to our high school because we had all the programming out of the local 6 high schools within the 5 high schools in the district. So, but I did it, and my mom said, you should go ahead and try. So I went and I filled out the application. They said, okay, we'll give you a call in a couple of days. I went in for an interview, and they hired me on the spot. I was like, oh, great. Okay. Well, I didn't know at the time, but the school that I ended up getting hired for was an alternative school. So it was a therapeutic day school for high school students. For, at the time back then, we referred them to as ED and BD, which meant that it was for emotional disabilities and behavior.
Wow.
Okay. Now we have the students that are the most aggressive because of their disability. They're oftentimes their emotions are dysregulated. They may have had some type of contact in terms of with the judicial system because of some impulsivity and poor decision making. So we had students that had ankle monitors on, and we had some students that have gotten in fights in school. Mind you, they were girls and boys both. But that they were from the students from all of the local high schools in the area, not just one district, because it was a cooperative. And so for the first time, I will tell you, in my career, and the first time in my life since sports, something actually came natural to me. And then I did some work. I went back to school, and I ended up deciding to be a special education major. I thought it would be a good way to do so. And so during my undergrad, I actually had a double major of special education with the concentration of bilingual, bicultural special education, teaching English as a second language, and then also Spanish language. I had majored in during that time there as well. I always felt I had to prove myself, and that was one of it. And even so much that one semester, I took 24 credit hours, which is equivalent to 1 year in one semester. If everyone can do the math and that.
It's brutal. It's brutal, is what it is. Yeah.
still still managed to have a 3.0 that semester. So yeah, it's brutal, and it took a lot of intestinal fortitude and grit, and to do that, and to figure that out. And I was working part time on top of that, so I did that, and then that's when I got my first teaching job. Shortly after graduation, from that. So that's it's kind of my story of how I got into education.
We talked about your journey through education and your calling towards education. How did you transition from that to becoming a co-author of a book? Can you walk us through the steps between
Sure,
those two?
sure. So in order, what we did and what I did from that is pretty much this. So um, my journey, really, the opportunity was afforded to me, I would say, because of my lived experience. And so, as I said, hit on earlier, is that um, a lot of things in terms of my educational pathway and career, I kind of had a lot of feelings of trying to prove myself, right? And trying to understand things. So, because of my early upbringing, background, life experience, I have, early experiences of, situational poverty. In my family, and when I was growing up, also experiences of trauma, also the fact that, believe it or not, I also had a speech deficit and impediment. So I received speech and language services, and so I had a disability. I also had an invisible disability that we didn't know about a lot back then. So I also had ADHD, and so growing up, I had a lot of impulsivity. I was bored. School didn't really, excite me. It was easy. So kind of like I didn't want to do anything more. And also because of some of the situational poverty, my family didn't have a lot of money. So I have experience of having, holes in my sneakers and my gym shoes, also not just the hand-me-downs, but also the fact that, my parents couldn't buy me things. So I'd have like the same two or three pairs of pants and like, four or five shirts and like rotate them. With all of those things, I had a lot going on, but and also my dad was a second generation alcoholic. So growing up in my household when I was younger, the bonding and attachment style that I had and I had with them was safe and dangerous, right? So depending on his state, right? Sometimes I'd feel very safe, other times very dangerous because I didn't know who I was going to get, right? However, it's a disease, right? Alcoholism, addiction, it's a disease, and it doesn't have a face, doesn't have a name, doesn't have a shape, doesn't stereotype, does not discriminate. But the one thing I can say about my dad is he was college educated, had a college degree, and his degree was in child development. And what he did was, one, I had books all over the house. So it was always reading. He was always teaching me things I didn't learn in school. So it allowed me to be ahead of all my peers. And he always had a lot of things around me, and being proud of who I am as a young Black boy and being a Black, boy in America, and all the great things that we did. And also he got me involved in sports because he understood that this neurodivergent brain and all this energy, right, it needed an outlet from somewhere, and recognized that I was a pretty good athlete. I still had the whole Division I college experience, from the most stereotypical points that you could think to everything, and we were winning, right? But I wasn't happy, and there was something inside that I was still searching for. But I found a temporary, non-sustainable way to cope with that, and that was through alcohol and drugs. And this was also the first time that I had my first suicide attempt. And, obviously I'm here to still live and tell you about it, but that was the first time that I attempted to, in my life. And I subsequently ended up having alcohol poisoning. I was taken to the emergency room hospital, dropped off by my friends. And then I woke up the next morning and I was in the psych ward. And I did not know what was going on. And also the first time, so at 19 years old, was the first time I ever talked to a therapist. And it was eye opening. And so I eventually ended up leaving school after the year. So I was there for 1 year, came back home, still have a lot of unresolved issues. I thought, well, I'm back home, things are going to work out. That's fine. But it continued with a lot of marijuana use, alcohol, etc. And so I was kind of tapped to say, hey, you know what? You ever thought about that? Okay, sure, I'll do it. So I started my master's program while working full time and having a family and working about 55 hours a week. and still doing that. And once again, pushing through, just doing it head down, but also at the same time, still self-medicating, because I felt that it was owed to me. I'm busting my butt to get through this. I'm still feeling a lot of shame, a lot of guilt. Not that I'm at, doing my best. And then, eventually I moved up, the ladder in my field. When I finished my graduate program, I was told that there's no positions in administration. So I looked outside, and then I eventually got hired, and I never thought it would happen. I got hired as an assistant superintendent, of schools at 34 years old, and I was the youngest assistant superintendent in the state of Illinois. And so now I'm in central office administration. So not only did I, you know, after graduating college 10 years after I finished high school and all the accolades that I ended up getting with my grade point average, et cetera, I've now surpassed all of my peers and jumped over being from working in building level administration as just a dean to now I'm under the superintendent. It's a lot of steps, but once again, I wanted to make money, provide for my family. Didn't realize how much I was really taking on, because now I'm going from that to 60 hours a week, being on call all the time, two cell phones, having to report, do all these things. Didn't understand the scope of the work and what it meant. And it was a lot. I was able to provide for my family, but I became pretty much a slave to the dollar. And that began my 15-year career working in central office administration and leadership. But all the while, even though I'm doing well and I'm doing great at my job and I'm getting promotions and I'm doing program accolade, I'm still not feeling well. I'm still have the undiagnosed mental illness. I have the issues with the trauma that are unresolved, and I'm still using alcohol and drugs to cope. And I was what I consider myself a weekend warrior. Eventually, though, everything came to a head. I had about a 2 month stint where what I now know was a manic state, and I was using, and then everything crashed and came to a head. And I had a mental illness crisis, which, IE is pretty much a nervous breakdown. And I found myself checking in and admitting myself into a hospitalized program for treatment, dual diagnosis, mental illness, and also for substance abuse. And then that is when for the first time, my mind, body, and my spirit could rest in almost 2 decades. Well, professionally, personally, I'd been pushing through forever. I had imposter syndrome. I had this guilt. I had this shame. I wasn't being myself. I was taking on a lot. I had a lot of stress, and I was, figuring out I got to provide for my family, but that I didn't have any positive and sustainable coping strategies to do so. So it came to a head. But during that time, even though it was very dark, it was the best thing that ever happened to me, and it saved my life. Why? Because I began to understand myself and do the work on myself. I'd done it professionally, but I hadn't done the internal work that allows one to truly be able to take advantage of all their potential that they had. And that's when I created my 3 Bs: balance, boundaries, and breaks. It was during my darkest time, and I was in treatment, and I was in therapy, and I was in a hospitalization program. And I started reflecting because these 3 themes came in. And the first one was balance. The understanding of finding out a balance. And we talk about life work balance all the time. I realized I was an extremist. There was no middle ground for me. It was always either or, whether it was something positive or negative. I was going to be the best at it, and no one was going to tell me any different. If I needed to catch up and play catch up because I felt I was comparing to myself to other people, I was going to do it. I didn't understand the importance of being in the middle and middle ground. I also realized that there's no such thing as work-life balance. It is a myth. The reality is life ebbs and flows, and true balance in terms of being equal does not exist, and it never will, and you will always chase it. The reality is that balance is about equity, right? It's about giving the time, energy, and effort to people, relationships, and activities that are going to be reciprocal, and also that you're going to give it to them when they need it and it's appropriate. Sometimes it's going to be a 50-50. Sometimes it's going to be 70-30. Sometimes it's going to be 60-40. Sometimes in your favor, sometimes in the activity or the other person's favor. But you have to be okay and accept that and understand that's okay. So that's the first B. The next B is boundaries. And it wasn't so much of me understanding the boundaries of other people, because I always knew that, right? You're always told that. The reality is I didn't understand how to implement my own boundaries and understand the power of no and accept that it's okay to tell people no and not be ashamed of that and be okay. But as a people pleaser, right, the first thing you do, you don't want to tell people no. You don't want to do that. You're going to feel bad. People guilt you, they shame you. But you know what? At the end of the day, right, human beings are all about self-preservation, no matter what, right? That is us by our nature. And so we're going to do what we have to do when it matters for us. And that even if there is no malintent, human beings will drain you if you allow them. The first time you do something, it's a favor. The next time it becomes a learned behavior and it doesn't stop, it's expected. So you have to put your boundaries in. I didn't do that. I didn't. I took on too much at work. They'd say, "Hey, you want to volunteer for this, or take on another call for this, or you want to lead this sports team, or you want to sponsor this event?" Sure, sure, sure. Will I make money? Yeah, sure. Well, I didn't want to say no. Even with my family, they needed something. I drop everything and do it. And I had to understand that the power of no and being okay with that and giving myself permission to be okay to tell people no. And the last B was the breaks. And so the breaks was that I didn't pause. I didn't stop, smell the roses, didn't allow myself to do so. And especially in a Western society, we're very guilty of just pushing through, being on the rat race, right? Being on the proverbial hamster wheel. And we live in a microwave society. We want everything next. And I was a victim and I did the same thing. What's next? I finished my college degree. I jumped right into going getting a job. Never stopped, never celebrated. Got my master's degree. I didn't even walk the stage. I said, "You can mail me my master's degree." And so that saved my life. I realized that that's those things that were lacking, but those were the things I needed to change. And it allowed me to be sober, to be clean, to be active, engaged in my treatment. And then it also has helped in terms of my sustainable recovery, which has been almost 6 years now as we speak today of drug.
Congratulations on that. That's six years is a
Yeah.
long time. Once you get over I always tell people the first 3 years of my sobriety were
Oh,
terrible, but after the 3 years, it got really
yeah.
good. Now the three Bs is that in the book, and what's the title of the book?
What happened was I left treatment and I said, you know what? If I can do one thing and just share my story so it helps one person,
Mhm.
I'm and they said, "You're going to talk about your three B's." I said, "Yeah." And maybe, it'll catch on, but just one person. So I started on social media talking about my three B's. Next thing you know, it kind of caught on. And then people were offering me opportunities like this to do podcasts. And so I've done multiple podcast appearances. I started doing keynote speaking around my three B's. And originally it was just for the educator space, but then it kind of moved on to other folks in mental health, well-being, et cetera. And so the reason why I got involved with the book is because the curator and the publisher of the book, who is George Koros, he's a very good friend of mine today. He's probably the top education consultant and speaker in the country and doing what he does. He saw what I was doing, had been following me on social media and messaged me one day and say, "Hey, I love your three B's. Can you talk?" It was probably like 11 o'clock at night. I'm like, "Okay, sure. What do you want to talk about?" And he loved it. And then he talked about, "Hey, I'm going to do some projects. I'd like to get you on my podcast, talk about your three B's. Maybe we can do some work." And then he said, "I got a book coming up. I love what you talk about education, your background story, about what you've done and how you do it. Would you be willing to share that and writing a book?" And that's how I got opportunity to be, and because of a teacher. So I talked about a mentor when I became superintendent. She's the one that hired me and saw something in me. And she became a great mentor. And then I also talked about my three B's and talking about specifically social emotional learning and well-being for educators and taking care of themselves. You know what? And it was a great opportunity, and things came from that, and then other opportunities. And then I was tapped for another book, the 100 series, and that's where I wrote the chapter about stop being the martyr and the culture of martyrdom in education and how we got to stop doing that. And then things just kind of snowballed to where they are now, and I'm grateful, and in my recovery, and I'm able to talk about that. And my three B's went from just an educator piece to moving in the mental health space, and then it resonated with everyone, regardless of your profession, whatever you do. If you being just a mom, a dad, a grandparent, understanding the importance of taking care of yourself and, making sure that you do that so you're the best version of others and being able to really, truly be the master of your own destiny, right? And giving those bits of knowledge. And like I said, I wanted to make sure nobody ever went through what I did. And doing that, it's been great because it also helps me in my recovery journey and my healing, and also be able to give back to the world as well.
Thank you for joining us on the Free Time Mastermind podcast. I'm your host, Robert Gaines. To support the channel, please click like, comment, subscribe, and share this episode. The book Scintilla, The Ultimate Guide to Generating Business Ideas, Products, and Services, is now available on Amazon. It's available as an ebook, softcover, and hardcover. Please find the link to the Amazon page in the description, as well as other links relevant to this episode.